My husband went to work, and that's when my nephew approached me. Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm 43 years old, and today I want to tell you a story that might change the way you see me. Who knows? It might even make you see the world in a different way. You know, sometimes life asks us to get off the right path and cross boundaries we never thought we would cross. That's exactly what happened to me. Before you start, follow our channel so you don't miss any stories like this. William and I had been together for over 20 years. Our marriage seemed like a dream to those who looked from the outside, perfect, without a single crack. Even I, for a while, believed that. But deep down, something wasn't right. There was an emptiness that I couldn't explain. William had always been a good man, never raised his voice, always responsible. But his work was his priority. Little by little, he became a visitor in our home. More of a ghost than my husband. I would look at myself in the mirror and feel as if my own light was going out. Our house, in an upscale neighborhood in São Paulo, was beautiful, huge, with sophisticated furniture. But it was cold, just like I was feeling. Over time, I realized that our house was a reflection of me. Beautiful on the outside, but lifeless on the inside. It was into this scenario that Henry appeared. He was the son of my sister, Clara, and he was only 24 years old. He was in college and came to live with us to be closer to the university. At first, it was something normal, a family help. But Henry was something different. His deep eyes carried an energy that made me feel like I had forgotten something. He was charismatic, attentive, and that took me by surprise. William never looked at me like that. I remember an ordinary day in the kitchen, when our fingers accidentally touched. A shiver ran down my spine, something I hadn't felt in years. He smiled at me and called me auntie, but his tone was different, almost like a joke. That touched me. It was the beginning of something that I didn't know where it would end. As the days went by, Henry was always around. Our conversations, which at first were simple, about everyday things, began to gain layers. There was a connection there that I hadn't expected. Then, one night, William had to travel for work, as he always did. Henry and I were alone. The atmosphere that night was different, warmer, full of something I couldn't explain. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and talked for hours. But suddenly, the silence between us seemed to say more than any words. Henry came over to me on the couch. His fingers brushed my leg lightly, and it was as if the world had stopped. "Do you think you're alone, Olivia?" he whispered, his voice low, almost a secret. My heart raced. I knew I should pull back, say something to push him away. But instead, I looked at him, our eyes meeting, and my voice came out almost as a whisper. "Henry, we can't." He smiled confidently, but unhurriedly, like someone who knows exactly what he's doing. What I felt inside was a whirlwind, guilt, desire, fear, all rolled into one. When he finally touched his lips to mine, it was like an explosion. For a moment, everything that held me back crumbled, and something that had been trapped inside me finally broke free. I knew I was crossing a line from which there might be no going back, but in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. That morning, William left early for another work trip, as he often did. The house was silent, except for the soft sound of the magazine Henry was leafing through in the living room. Even so, I could feel his gaze following me. There was something in the air, a tension that seemed to scream in every moment we spent together. He stood up, walking slowly towards me, and when his fingers lightly touched my skin, my heart raced. "Henry, this has to stop," I murmured, trying to remain calm. But he only smiled, a confident smile that seemed to say he knew exactly what he was doing. The following weeks turned into a game that I didn't know how to end. Every look, every word, carried a weight that we couldn't ignore. William, as always, was too busy to notice. He had no idea what was going on under the roof of our house. One afternoon, while I was on the porch, trying to get my thoughts in order, Henry appeared, silent as always, but his presence seemed to fill the entire space. "You can't stop thinking about it, can you?" he asked, his voice low but full of provocation. I tried to argue, to find the strength to resist. "Henry, this isn't right," I said, but even I knew my words were weak. He seemed to have a certainty that left me speechless, as if he knew exactly where I was vulnerable. When he came closer again, everything inside me struggled between the right and the inevitable. His lips touched mine, and in that moment I felt like I was being carried away by a wave that I could no longer contain. It was wrong, I knew, but the line between resistance and surrender no longer existed. Then, everything changed. William returned unexpectedly, sooner than expected. The sound of the lock bringing me back to reality in a blink of an eye. I pulled away from Henry quickly, trying to appear natural, but the tension in the air was almost palpable. William walked into the kitchen with a calm smile. "Everything okay in here?" he asked casually. My heart raced, but I forced a smile and nodded. Henry, on the other hand, maintained his confident posture as if it were just another part of a game he was determined to win. And now, looking back, I wonder, what if it were you? What would you have done? Would you have resisted or given in like I did? Sometimes temptations appear when we least expect them, and it is in these moments that we face the most difficult choices. Leave your comment below and share your opinion, because deep down, we have all had a moment when we were put to the test. The following days were a mix of relief and uneasiness. William, oblivious to everything, continued with his routine. Henry, on the other hand, seemed even more confident, as if the situation had only increased his control over the game he had created. I tried to distance myself, to find ways to regain my balance within myself, but his presence was suffocating and at the same time, addictive. One night, William announced that he was going out to dinner with coworkers. "Don't wait up for me, it's going to be long," he said casually before leaving me alone with Henry once more. I tried to occupy myself with simple tasks, washing the dishes, organizing the cupboards, but every step in the house seemed to echo, and I knew he was there, watching. "Do you really think you can avoid me?" His voice cut through the silence as I stood in the kitchen. I turned around, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "Henry, this has to stop," I insisted, but he didn't seem to hear. He stepped closer, and my heart raced the way it always did when he was around. "Olivia, why do you fight so hard against something you clearly want?" he said, his voice soft but full of conviction. I wanted to scream, to push him away, but the words wouldn't come out. He was right. There was something about him that made my self-control disappear. "You don't understand what's at stake," I whispered, trying to keep my distance. "I understand more than you think," he replied, moving even closer. When I felt his hand on my face, a shiver ran through my body. The internal conflict inside me seemed unbearable. It was then that something unexpected happened. The house phone rang, cutting the moment like a knife. I answered it quickly, my voice shaking. It was William. "Hi, I just called to let you know that I might be back early. Dinner is canceled," he said. My heart almost stopped. "Earlier?" I repeated, trying to hide the panic in my voice. "Yeah, maybe in half an hour. Everything okay there?" he asked nonchalantly. "Everything great," I lied, hanging up the phone. When I turned around, Henry was still there, now leaning against the sink, watching me. "He's coming back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe you should decide what you really want, Olivia," he replied, his expression defiant. For the next few minutes, I ran around the house trying to erase any evidence of the tension that hung in the air. Henry, however, seemed unfazed, as if nothing worried him. When William arrived, his presence brought a sense of normalcy that I couldn't tell if it was comforting or suffocating. He kissed me lightly on the cheek and headed to his room, looking tired. That night, lying next to him, my mind was racing. What was I doing? How had I gotten to this point? But at the same time, the memory of Henry's eyes, his unwavering trust, made my heart race. The days passed, but the tension between Henry and me continued to grow. Every moment we were alone was a battle. One afternoon, I decided to confront him. "Henry, this can't go on. You have to leave. I can't do this to William." He laughed, but there was something different in his expression. "And you think you can just erase all of this? Pretend it didn't happen?" His words stuck in my head. I knew he was right. It wasn't just about what had happened between us, but about what it said about me, about my marriage, about everything I had been ignoring for years. Then William did something unexpected. He came home early on a Friday with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. "I felt like I needed to thank you for everything, Olivia. I know I'm not the most present husband, but I want you to know that you mean everything to me." His words hit me like a blow. For the first time in years, I saw the real William, without the veil of routine or emotional distance. That gesture, so simple, yet so loaded with meaning, touched me in a way I hadn't even expected. Suddenly, I realized that my relationship with Henry wasn't about him. It was about me, about the emptiness I had allowed to grow inside me, about the things I had let go of, including my own marriage. That night, I made a decision. I went to Henry and said, as firmly as I could muster, "It's over. This should never have happened." He tried to argue, but something in my tone made it clear I meant it. He looked at me for a long moment, then just shrugged. "As you wish, Olivia," he said, with a smile that seemed more sad than confident this time. The next day, Henry announced he was leaving. He said he had found a place closer to the university. William was surprised, but he didn't question it too much. As for me, I felt a mixture of relief and loss, as if I were closing the door on something that should never have begun. But the real battle began later. William was the same, but I wasn't. The doubts, the regrets, and the weight of the choices I had made were still with me. Could I ever get back what I had lost, both in my marriage and within myself? And now, looking back on all this, I wonder, can the mistakes of the past really teach us anything? Or do they haunt us, like shadows that never disappear?